Okay, let's dive in. We've got quite a bit of material here.
Yeah, a real mix. Some heavy academic papers, archaeological reports, even genetic studies.
They're all pointing towards one place, ancient Canaan.
That's right. We're talking the Levantine coast, which, covers a lot of modern-day Palestine and surrounding areas.
And for a long time, it was kind of seen as just a buffer zone between the big
Yes.
empires.
Exactly, like Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Hittites. Canaan was often just the stage.
Right, where other people's history happened.
Mm.
But what we're looking at today, based on these sources, is a completely different picture.
Yeah, the mission here is really to challenge that old idea.
This material suggests Canaan wasn't a footnote at all. It was more like a blueprint for civilization.
It really shifts your perspective. You start digging into the evidence and you see this incredible legacy, almost like a profound message from the past connecting right to us.
Okay, so let's unpack that. We're talking about everything from, well, the alphabet to trade, diplomacy. What's the core argument from these sources about Canaan's role?
The central idea is that Canaan was just this hotbed of innovation, especially during the Bronze Age, say 3,500 down to maybe 1150 BCE.
And its influence carried on into the early Iron Age too, right?
Definitely. Roughly 1200 to 900 BCE, still very significant.
And we're not talking small things here. Scholars like Felix Huffelmeyer, among others, they point to really fundamental stuff.
Utterly fundamental. Things like, urbanism, writing systems, huge trade networks.
Ah.
The roots run deep here in the Levant.
Location must have been key, sitting right there on the coast.
Oh, absolutely critical. This fertile strip right between the major power centers,
Wow.
Egypt south, Mesopotamia and Anatolia north and east. It was the crossroads.
A hinge, yeah. So not just passively receiving ideas, but actively processing and generating new ones.
That's the picture emerging. The sources credit Canaanites with major contributions across so many areas: writing, commerce, diplomacy, city planning, art, technology. It's a long list.
And maybe the most surprising connection you mentioned, genetics.
Yeah, this is where it gets really compelling. Recent studies looking at ancient DNA,
Tell me about that. They found a strong genetic link.
a really strong link. They analyzed DNA from Bronze Age Canaanite remains and found, well, remarkable continuity
Continuity with who?
with modern populations.
Yeah.
The sources state that modern Jewish and Arabic-speaking groups in the Levant people in Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, Palestine, they inherit more than half their ancestry directly from these Bronze Age Canaanites.
Wait, more than half, so it's not just cultural influence, it's actual DNA.
That's what the genetic evidence indicates.
Yeah.
It's powerful stuff. It means these weren't just people who disappeared. Their descendants are still there.
That really reframes the whole idea of who these people were and their connection to today. Incredible.
It truly solidifies that connection.
Okay, let's dig into one of the biggest contributions highlighted, giving the world its letters, our alphabet.
This is fundamental. The sources make a really strong case that the story of our alphabet begins in Canaan.
Where do we see the first signs?
The earliest hints are in something called Proto-Canaanite script. It pops up on flints in the Sinai Egyptian sites, dating maybe 1900 to 1400 BCE.
And they were basically adapting Egyptian hieroglyphs, which
Yeah.
were pictures, right?
Exactly. Taking those complex symbols and simplifying them way down, making them represent single consonant sounds, it was a huge conceptual leap.
But there was a gap in the evidence for a while.
There was, between those early examples and the later alphabets we know better. That's why this find at Tel Ashish is so important.
The missing link, what was it?
A small piece of pottery, a jar fragment. But crucially, according to Huffelmeyer's team, it dates to around 1450 BCE,
Okay.
and it's inscribed with 27 letters of a proto-alphabet.
And why is that specific piece so significant?
Because, the argument goes, it's the earliest securely dated example of this kind of alphabetic script from the Levant itself. It bridges that gap perfectly. Shows that evolution happening right there, right then. Tangible proof.
So it kind of locks in the timeline.
In a way, yes. Then, after the Bronze Age collapse, around 1200 BCE, this system gets standardized, spreads, often under the name Phoenician.
Which was basically the same Canaanite language, just a later phase.
Linguistically, yes, essentially.
And then the Greeks borrowed it.
That's the next big step. Around the 8th century BCE, they took the Phoenician script and made that crucial addition: symbols for vowels.
Creating the first true alphabet. as we think of it.
Right. And from Greek, it's pretty much a straight line.
To Latin and then English.
Exactly. Proto-Canaanite to Phoenician to Greek to Latin to the AZ we use every single day.
Even the word alphabet.
Straight from the first two Greek letters, alpha and beta.
Which came from?
The Hebrew Phoenician aleph and bet. The names themselves show the lineage.
It's genuinely mind-bending. Every time you read something, you're using technology developed thousands of years ago by these people.
It's a fundamental piece of ancient tech embedded in modern life. Global literacy owes it a huge debt.
Okay, moving beyond letters. Canaanite ingenuity also shown in trade, didn't it? That location was perfect.
Absolutely prime real estate for commerce. You had the Via Maris, the big land route cutting right through.
Connecting Egypt and Syria and beyond.
Yeah. But they didn't just stick to land. They were major maritime players.
Taken to the sea. How did they manage that?
Well, their coastal cities were pioneers. The sources really highlight these specific ceramic jars, Canaanite jars, archaeologists call them, amphor.
And what was special about them?
They seem to be designed specifically for sea travel, features that let them pack tightly, transport wine, oil, other goods efficiently on ships.
Like early standardized shipping containers.
Kind of, yeah. Often considered the first amphora type really built for the sea, and you find them everywhere.
Everywhere meaning?
All along the Levantine coast, naturally, but also far away. Even Mycenaean Greece during the late Bronze Age.
So these weren't just short hops along the coast.
Oh no. Proper voyages. Maritime archaeology confirms they were sailing across the eastern Med Cyprus, Crete, the Aegean Islands.
What were they trading for?
Bringing back valuable stuff. Ivory, timber, metals. Later on, when we call them Phoenicians, their sailing skills become legendary.
Right. The stories of sailing around Africa, reaching India.
Those emerge around 1000 BCE, particularly associated with Tyre. Shows the scale of their ambition.
And these trade routes weren't just for physical goods, were they?
Definitely not. They were information highways, too. Ideas traveled, religious practices. You see cults like Astarte and Reshef spreading.
And technology.
Absolutely. Skills in glassmaking, metalworking, that kind of know-how moved along these networks.
So Canaan acted as this essential bridge, channeling goods, ideas, culture, tech between the big players.
A central hub, really, facilitating this huge exchange across the ancient world.
It's amazing. Now, you mentioned Canaan wasn't one big empire like Egypt. It was more a patchwork.
Yeah, a collection of city-states. Ugarit, Megiddo, Hazor, Byblos. Lots of independent centers.
So how did they manage relations between themselves and with the bigger powers?
That's another area where they were surprisingly sophisticated. They developed robust diplomacy even without a central government.
And we actually have proof of this, like written records.
Incredible proof. The Amarna letters are the key here. Thousands of clay tablets.
From when?
14th century BCE. These are letters sent by Canaanite rulers and envoys to the Egyptian pharaoh.
Written in what language?
Akkadian cuneiform. That was the international diplomatic language of the time.
What were they writing about? Just asking for favors?
Oh, much more. Diplomatic requests, yes, but also intelligence reports on neighbors, descriptions of local conflicts, complex political maneuvering, desperate pleas for military aid.
Wow, a real snapshot of international relations.
Exactly. And it wasn't just outward-facing. We also have archives from places like Ugarit from the 1200s BCE.
What's in those?
Treaties with major powers like the Hittites, detailed trade agreements, letters exchanged with other Canaanite cities, formal stuff.
So they had established protocols, ways of making agreements.
They did, and historians like Alice Mandel really emphasized the role of the scribes. They weren't just clerks.
Yeah.
They were skilled diplomats. Mandel talks about their professional acumen and ingenuity embedded right in the letters, using subtext, rhetoric.
Persuasion tactics. Basically early foreign policy advisors.
You could say that. And beyond the letters, there's another fascinating aspect, using sacred sites for diplomacy.
Sacred sites. How would that work?
Archaeologists suggest certain sanctuaries, high places, maybe the temple at Hazor, or border shrines like Bethel functioned as neutral ground.
Like a safe zone.
Kind of, yeah. Sacred, so maybe considered inviolable. Places where different, sometimes rival groups could meet safely.
An ancient DMZ with religious backing.
A bit like that. It allowed interaction, maybe trade negotiations, maybe even settling disputes under shared religious customs, sometimes involving oaths, or even exchanging hostages as guarantees.
That's really clever. Building systems for coexistence, even when politically fragmented.
Finding ways to manage relationships. talk terms, laying groundwork for interstate norms.
Amazing. Okay, so sophisticated societies, clever diplomacy. What about building things? Infrastructure, arts?
They were remarkable builders, too. We see huge stone walls, big temples, complex city layouts, especially from the Middle Bronze Age.
But you mentioned something about underground engineering.
Ah, yes, their water systems. This is truly impressive.
What was the problem they were solving?
Many cities were on hills, good for defense, bad for water access if the spring was outside the walls.
Right.
So their solution, digging these massive underground tunnels and shafts, sometimes incredibly deep, straight down through bedrock,
To do what?
to tap into the water table or channel water from a distant spring right into the heart of the fortified city.
That must have been an immense amount of work.
Monumental. Think about doing that with Bronze or Iron Age tools. We have famous examples at Megiddo, Hazor, Gezer.
Now, I've heard those systems, particularly Gezer, linked to King Solomon.
That was the traditional view, yeah, based on certain interpretations. But archaeology has really updated that picture.
How so?
Well, recent, much more precise dating, especially for the Gezer Tunnel, it puts its construction firmly in the Middle Bronze Age.
When's that?
Around 2000 BCE, that's centuries before Solomon. The archaeologists working there are pretty clear it looks like Canaanite engineering from that earlier period.
So another case of Canaanite achievement maybe being credited elsewhere later on.
It seems that way. The Hazor system also shows development from an earlier Bronze Age structure. These were Canaanite masters figuring out urban water security,
Yeah.
vital for survival.
And beyond the big engineering, what about arts and crafts?
Highly skilled artisans. We mentioned the pottery already, those distinctive Canaanite jars. Ubiquitous, well-designed for transport.
Mass production for trade.
Seems like it. And metallurgy, too. Skilled workers casting bronze, using copper from places like Timnah, that fueled trade as well.
And the famous purple dye. Tyrian purple.
Ah, yes. Legendary stuff made from murex snails. While Tyre became famous for it later, the expertise was developed along the Canaanite coast much earlier.
Is there new evidence for that?
Yeah, really exciting finds at a site called Tel Shimona. It was a coastal dye workshop.
What did they find?
According to the lead archaeologist, Golan Shalvi, the site yielded basically double the artifacts related to dye production than all other known sites combined.
Wow. Double.
Yeah. And his co-author, Eilert Gilboa, interprets this as showing industrial-scale production there way back in the 9th century BCE, much earlier than the peak Roman demand.
Industrial scale in the 9th century BCE. Incredible. So from huge water tunnels to fine pottery to luxury dyes, they were innovators across the board.
Applying serious ingenuity to survival, trade, and even luxury goods.
Okay, so we've laid out this incredible range of Canaanite innovation. How do we really connect it all to today? How did this legacy actually persist?
That's the crucial part, bridging that gap. The sources point to continuity in several key ways: genetics, language, and just the diffusion of culture and ideas.
Let's revisit the genetics again, because that feels so concrete.
It really is. As geneticists like David Reich have pointed out, analyzing that Bronze Age DNA shows that direct, significant link. It's not just theoretical. Many modern people in the Levant carry a large part of their ancestry from these very people.
Their lineage didn't just vanish.
No, it persisted. It's written in the biology of the region today.
A tangible thread stretching back thousands of years. What about language? Does anything survive there?
Oh, definitely. Languages change, of course, but linguists can trace influences. Modern Palestinian Arabic dialects, for instance, preserve elements, vocabulary, some structures, and especially place names that echo earlier languages spoken there.
Like Canaanite languages,
Yeah.
Hebrew, Aramaic.
Exactly. You can see the layers. The ancient sounds haven't entirely disappeared from the landscape or the speech.
So the history is literally in the blood and in the words.
In many ways, yes. Powerful evidence for that deep continuity, linking modern people back to this ancient culture and land.
But you mentioned earlier that sometimes these achievements get misattributed later on.
Yes, and that's a key point. These sources help untangle. Classical writers, later histories, they often focused on the Phoenicians, who were essentially the Iron Age coastal Canaanites, mainly from the north.
Right.
Or they credited things to later Greek or Roman influence. And this tended to obscure the earlier, broader Canaanite origins of many things.
Like the alphabet example again.
Exactly. The common story is Phoenicians invented it. But the evidence, like that Tell just shared, shows the development starting centuries earlier across a wider Canaanite area.
And those Canaanite jars we talked about.
Sometimes you still hear them casually called Phoenician amphora, even though the design originates way back in the Bronze Age, before that term was really used that way.
So part of the value of this new research is setting the record straight, using the evidence.
Precisely. Using archaeology, linguistics, genetics, the hard data to separate out these later labels and see the deeper roots, building a narrative that's freed from mythology and nationalism, as one source puts it, grounded in evidence.
Okay, so when we pull all these threads together, the alphabet, the trade networks, the diplomacy, the engineering, the genetic links, the linguistic echoes, what's the big picture? What is that profound message you mentioned earlier?
I think the really profound message is just how foundational this ancient Canaanite society actually was. The scientific record, the hard evidence, it shows these people weren't peripheral. They laid down a critical blueprint for so much that came later.
Things we consider core to civilization.
Absolutely. The alphabet's journey, the patterns of global trade, how states interact, how cities support themselves, even craft specialization.
Mhm.
So many of these things have crucial early roots, maybe even their first real germination in the Bronze Age Levant.
And seeing it this way, based on evidence, moves us past older narratives.
It does. It moves past potentially biased accounts or nationalistic claims and reveals the Bronze Age Levant as this incredibly fertile soil where key seeds of modernity were first sown. It's a history based on data, not just stories.
It really makes you rethink the origins of almost everything around us. It underscores how interconnected human history is.
Exactly. Innovations from thousands of years ago, from a region sometimes pushed to the margins of history, are directly shaping how we live, communicate, and organize ourselves today.
It's about recognizing that shared heritage,
Yeah.
right? And acknowledging where these fundamental tools and ideas actually came from based on the evidence.
Yeah, appreciating the power of that evidence to correct the record and show us these deeper connections, looking beyond the usual historical headliners.
It's a powerful reminder that our modern world has these incredibly deep, complex roots reaching back in ways we often don't even realize.
And science is uncovering those roots more clearly than ever before.
So maybe a final thought for everyone listening. Just consider the world you navigate every day. The letters you're reading, maybe on a screen right now. The global systems that connect you. The way our cities work. How much of that has a direct line back to these ancient pioneers on the Levantine coast?
And what does it mean for us today to really see and acknowledge that deep, complex, and shared history?
It's a history that, as these sources make clear, is very much still alive.
Still relevant, still echoing today.
This deep dive really highlights Canaan's undeniable evidence-backed role in building so much of what we now consider civilization.
A legacy that is ancient, profound, and surprisingly present.
Indeed. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.